You know, every time I do Q3, I do this, every time the little interface is different because they've changed some aspect. Why? Why do they do that? It's just evil. Okay.
Can we move the screen up some? Would that be better? No? Fine.
We'll wait a couple more things. Stephanie, yeah, you can go there because I saw that they're posting it to YouTube as well.
Oh, great. Okay.
And I think the YouTube is like 150 views of the second one.
Oh,
So
wow.
I know people are catching it somehow. I don't know.
Great. Thank you.
Stephanie, we also missed last week, so we just finished our getting caught up as well. But it took us 2 days. It takes longer when you're kind of working at your own pace.
Yes.
Hey, Ed, I have a question though about last week.
Sure.
It seems like it kind of, oh yeah, this is Bonnie. It's a baby Bonnie. She's 2 months old.
Oh, starting her out the right way.
That's right. So it kind of felt like, at least the recording that I saw, it just kind of like popped into Islam. Like, did you guys catch that too? Like you were missing, how much was missing, I guess? How much did I miss?
No, well, Islam's the first one we touched.
Okay, so maybe it just kind of I don't know, it seemed like it went into your thought, like there was no intro to it, but
I don't know,
yeah,
you never know.
Yeah, okay.
Actually, the first thing he said was, I don't know what happened, or there was some kind of technical, that's the first thing you say, so maybe we did miss something.
It could be.
A lot of questions were answered, so it's cool.
It was, Caitlin, it was probably more or less drivel. I was just talking. Because I know I started with Islam, and I think Scientology was right behind it with Baha'i faith, because I didn't have time to get the Wicca.
Right, yeah. Oh, it was so good. I love learning about Scientology. I love learning about all these crazy religions.
Some of that stuff is crazy.
Yes.
Well, tonight's not going to be any more crazy. I mean, they're just as nuts. Well, I mean, no offense, but I mean, sometimes you got to watch this stuff and just kind of laugh. I mean, I on my Q3 show, about 3 episodes or so, I just started laughing. I mean, it's just nobody can seem to get the right facts in order, not on COVID, not on these protest things, not on these. You can't figure out what the heck anybody's saying. Every 5 seconds they change their mind, and they're extremely emotional on all of those things, not making any sense whatsoever. I have refrained from commenting on almost everything, only because everything I hear, everything I see is all baloney. Anybody with any kind of intelligence can knock down every argument that's sitting out there. It's just
I wish that my generation thought like that.
And then Caitlin, I'm extremely biased towards the intellectual side rather than the reactive side. Right. So people are COVIDing to death, and I'm thinking, okay, there's 100,000 deaths, bad, but if there's normally 40 to 60,000 with a vaccine in play, I'm thinking the first time this thing shows up, that's not that crazy. I mean, in one full season, that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And then, of course, I'm a history nut. 1969, the Hong Kong flu, and we used to call it by where it came from. I mean, the first, we didn't know.
We didn't do any of this shelter in place for that either.
No. Well, if you remember 1969, do you remember what the big deal was in 1969? It killed 100,000 people in the United States. 100,000.
Wow. See, I didn't remember that.
well,
the population was much smaller then.
It was Woodstock, and there were 500,000 people elbow to elbow, and nobody canceled that kind of stuff. I mean, okay, you got it. I mean, and that stuff was indiscriminate. You know what I mean? And over 100,000 just on the Hong Kong flu alone. And they had the stupid what do you call those things? Vaccines, and they got vaccines all over the place. Viruses are deadly. Wash your hands. Stay away from people who are sick. Now there's a thought. But anyway, I get, hey, Jim Seymour. How about
Hello,
that?
Ed. Glad to see you. You're in our kitchen right now.
Well, I've been in that kitchen many times. How about
You
that?
better come and try it out again.
Oh, well, good for you. Everybody, this is Pam and Jim Seymour. They're from Seattle, and good friends of mine, and used to follow me when we did systematic theology classes, and there were, I don't know, 50 to 75 people in those rooms every week, and we would cover literally everything and deal with everything, every tangent in the planet for about 4 years solid. Hey, Craig, good to see you too. Haven't seen you in a long time. That's good.
Right.
Jeff? Okay, well, let me pray, and then we will jump into this thing. I'll give the standard spiel of disclaimer, and then we'll talk about Wicca, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Mormonism in that order. For those of you who take those notes, you can pick those up on Shelter Cove Church at Home if you want. It's nothing big. They're just standard things that we want to make sure we follow. And as you know, most of you know, I will follow tangents for no reason whatsoever. So those notes just keep me in line. So, Father, we thank you for this day. We ask, Lord, that you'd clear our minds of all the different things, from protests to political things to COVID-19 to all sorts of stuff out there. Just clear our minds for an hour and help us to just absorb what you want us to know, that maybe someday we might have a divine appointment with one of these guys that we're talking about, and we could pull this out and maybe use it for your glory. We love you, and we know that you're good, and we submit to that in the name of Jesus. Amen. Okay, standard application. You can interrupt anytime I say something that you don't get or you don't agree with even. That's even better. Speak up. That's always really, really helpful. However, there's a rule here. We don't allow people to be defensive, and we don't allow people to be offended by other people's thoughts and or statements, mainly because this is a seminary class. This is like going to Bible college, and they don't allow that there. People speak freely. Of course, if you speak, the professor will in fact hammer you in the seminary world as to why you think what you've just asked, which is always fun. But here we're a lot more forgiving and just speak up. Each one of these things that I'm going to be talking about is from an academic perspective. The same will be true next week with our final deal for comparative religion. It's all academic to me. And then we're going to do a 5th week, and it'll be the final week, and that'll be on denominations. So we're actually going to go through United Methodist, Wesleyanism, that kind of stuff that aren't necessarily comparative religion, but they are comparative denominations. So you'll get an idea of what those all think and why they are what they are today. And of course, as you know, there's a whole lot of paradigm changes in denominations all over the world. And we're not, too far from those kind of things in modern life. Then after that, directly after that, I'm not exactly sure if I'm going to skip a week or if I'm going to be right on top of it, but we will go into church history. And church history will take 6 weeks at least, where we will literally walk our way back from the book of Acts forward through the Catholic Church, through the monks, through the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, etc., Crusades, all of it. We'll touch on all of those things. And then directly after that, whenever I'm done with that, I committed to some folks that I would do a class on angels, Satan, and demons. So just know that that's coming somewhere in late summer. Okay? Speaking of demons, we're going to be talking about Wicca. And Wicca is a very interesting little thing, and I'm going to follow your little outline that we put out, and then I'm going to talk extensively about their other beliefs. Wicca's founder-wise there really wasn't any one person. It was founded in, give or take, the 19th century Britain. And of course it came over here. There's a guy by the name of Gerald Gardner who seemed to have had more influence in it in the early 1930s. 1930s is where quite a bit of, what do you call it, influence happened. So when we think of normal founders, there isn't really one here. It's more inspiration more than anything. Another person involved in this thing is called Margaret Murray. I think she was earlier than Mr. Gardner. But anyway, the point is they were more or less contemporaries in the sense that they started the whole concept. There's a book out there that they use, certainly the early groups did. Currently, when they first started anyway, they didn't have a, authoritative writing. It's called the Book of Shadows. That makes sense. Book of Shadows, Wicca. And again, it was compiled by Mr. Gardner and later expanded by him. And I got some in my eye. I got it. Him and other leaders. There is a book out there called The Witch's Bible. I think that's very fascinating as they use the word Bible in their authoritative writings. Some of this stuff strikes me as comical, sorry. And there's another one called The Spiral Dance. And that too has influence. And again, I wouldn't say that anybody uses any of those things as necessarily ways of operating per se, but they do have a heck of influence. When it comes to God, well, you can imagine, hence Wicca, you typically would think that it is what is it? I can't hear you. You got to hit your space bar if you're going to speak. Hit your space bar.
I'm not confident enough for you to hear my answer.
That's right.
I was going to say a woman
It
or
is.
a witch.
It's a woman.
Oh,
It's a woman, otherwise known as the goddess. That's what they tend their worship here. Sometimes you'll see a couple used in Wicca. So it's called the goddess and God. So I'm trying to think, where would I see that? I can't remember there's another term for it. I think it's called the Lord and Lady, I think, if I remember right, because they use a lot of medieval terms in their thing, even though they're fairly new comparatively to other things. The goddess, by the way, can be a symbol. They consider the goddess to be an impersonal force to everything. What does that remind you of? If that doesn't remind you of Brahman in Hinduism, I don't know what does. So Wicca has a Eastern mysticism to it. Now, Wiccans can be almost anything when it comes to the ism. Now, you and I are theists. We are theism oriented, right? Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, those guys were deism. But these guys, they could be anything they want. Normally though, they are polytheists and pantheists. So they believe in many gods, and they believe the entire universe is part of the God makeup. Pantheist. You can look that up. Google that, pantheist. You see that a lot. You see a lot of panentheism, as I said previously in one show or another, regarding Disney. Every time Disney puts out a movie, they love pantheism. I don't know why. They certainly don't like Christianity, but they certainly love the idea that the nature is, part of God. When I was a youth pastor in Seattle, I actually brought the Good Earth Society to speak to the youth group. The parents were wondering why I was doing that. I said, well, I want you to hear it from them before they go off to college and hear about this. And this guy talked about the earth being God, the world. I mean, the physical world. And so I put him up there. He could speak to the kids and parents as they wished. And then, of course, I taught the truth of it. So it was really fascinating to hear, and this guy was kind of a Wicca type of guy, pantheist, polytheist. As a general rule, Jesus is rejected. As a general rule, if he is even talked about, he's a, quote, spiritual teacher. I hate the phrase good teacher when you refer to Jesus, because he really isn't. That's a lousy term. Well, good in what regard? I mean, if you're talking about results, well, everybody he had died. They ran like the wind. They did nothing in their own life at the beginning until the resurrection. So I mean, if you're gonna, and a good teacher doesn't resurrect, by the way. A good teacher just speaks. And to think that Jesus is just a good teacher is silly. He's either God or he's nothing. Or to quote C.S. Lewis, he's either a liar, a lunatic, or he's Lord. But don't talk to me about this good teacher stuff. C.S. Lewis used to go on and on and on about how people use that term to, what do you call it, bypass having to deal with Jesus. I thought that was fascinating. Salvation, they don't believe that humanity is sinful, so therefore there is no saving. They do believe, however, to honor and work for the preservation of nature. So when you see and those of you from Seattle will know where this term came from, but when you see tree huggers out there, that's a literal term. They literally, when they first started, they literally grabbed the tree and wanted to prevent logging, and they chained themselves to trees. Unbelievable. But part of that is a Wiccan philosophy that says nature actually feels like has emotional touch, etc. It was 1987. I was down in Los Angeles at the LAX Hilton, and I was at this conference. There's about 1,200 of us, and Tony Campolo gets up there, and he's a American Baptist speaker, Eastern College in Philly, and worldwide Christian author, right? And he's really a phenomenal author. I mean, he's actually a better speaker than he's a writer, actually. So every time he was anywhere, I would go and see this guy. Well, Campolo gets up there and he says that he yells at all the youth pastors in the room, and he says, "You guys need a theology of ecology." A theology of ecology? Are you kidding me? And everybody kind of looked at each other going, what the heck is that? And then he blamed American youth groups for not doing enough in South America to prevent deforestation in Brazil, because that's why the famines and droughts were happening in Africa. So that night at the banquet, 1,200 people in the ballroom, some guy, youth pastors, you'd have to know youth pastors. They will do anything. I mean, this guy, it's a big fancy dinner. Everybody's all dressed up, and Campolo and Howard Hendricks and all those guys are in the center of the room. And he stands up on top of his chair, and he's got a spear of asparagus. And he goes, "Tony, help me, because he just got through telling him that every plant had a feeling, and place just erupted with laughter. I mean, I'll never forget that as long as I live. I can still see it today. I can see who it was, and Campolo just lost it. He thought that was the funniest thing ever. Wicca people, they love nature, and I mean, it's not just like I love nature. There's nothing better than Oregon coast. I could live there, but my friends, this isn't that kind of love. This is a worship love. I took a bunch of kids down the Oregon coast one time. We came around this rock, because I would go not where the beaches were, but where the rocks were meeting the ocean. And there's this woman, and she had drawn a pentagram in the sand, and she had all sorts of things, candles, the whole bit. This is late in the afternoon, and she was doing her thing. I mean, I don't know what it was, but I don't know how they do it, but and she was sitting there, and when we came around the court, because we're a bunch of loud kids and stuff, I just went, because I didn't know what ghost was running around out there, And so she was doing some sort of chant to the waves. That's what we're talking about with Wicca. It's like well, it's no different than charismatic worship, or you're raising your hand, you're speaking another language, that whole bit. It's a whole lot of mantra. You know what mantras are? Where you repeat the same things and you do it in a stronger and stronger intensity. Have you ever seen that done anywhere? That's really interesting. And a lot of Wicca people do that kind of thing towards nature. So just so you understand that. Because they would equate nature to the goddess, right? I mean, the power comes from the goddess. Death. According to Wiccan theology and philosophy, the body replenishes the earth. So when you die, that's the goddess's wish, is that you are to go into dust. The reason why you are to die has nothing to do with heaven or hell, but they have this agnostic feeling about life and death. Now, if you know anything about agnosticism, which isn't really a religion, and we aren't really going to talk about that, that's more of a theology thing. But agnosticism, as a general rule, the only part of the whole thing means not to know, right? So gnosis, Gnosis, is knowledge. Put an A in front of almost anything, and it means not or none. No knowledge. So Wiccans, when it comes to, are we going to come back as a dog or a cat or another human, or going anywhere for the afterlife of any type, they would all be pretty agnostic. When you think of atheism, you think of theos, right? That's the Greek term for God. And you put an A in front of that and you get atheist. That means no God, right? I would argue that almost everybody in the United States that calls themselves an atheist really are agnostic. There are very, very, very few atheists, and those that are really intelligent. I mean, they know how to defend that, because there's no defense, really. There's very little defense to be calling yourself an atheist. That would require you to have pure knowledge, right, of everything that's possible. And of course, that makes no sense. Agnosticism is a much more intellectual defense if you're going to reject any kind of deity. There is one thing that's an interesting thing, and it's fascinating to me, the title. Some of the Wiccan literature talk about the afterlife and a place called Summerland. You would think that if you're a Wiccan, it would be Winterland, but it's Summerland. Now, when I think of summer, I think of happy and smiles and, brats on the barbecue, stuff like that. You would think the dark, the incantation stuff would be, you would think it would be dark and not happy and go lucky. When I think of summer, I think of happy but other people like winter better, but I don't really know anybody like that, but maybe people in Colorado who like to ski, maybe those guys do. Okay, let me run through just a few other beliefs and practices, and then I'll run through the thing, and I'll pause for questions or any kind of comment. As a general rule, when it comes to Wiccan and what they do, because remember, it's not really a group thing, it's more of a small coven thing, which we'll talk about in a minute. They do practice divination, where there is I don't know how else to say it other than say what it is, because it's exactly like what you think of in the movies. They cast spells. Some of them use all sorts of different, newts, warts, and stuff like that. I mean, they do. They're not making that stuff up. And normally that's done in a circle. If they do get together in their little coven, as a general rule,
Oh, I lost your sound.
Pastor Ed,
There.
we can't hear you.
There
Oh,
we
there
go.
you are.
Yeah.
Thanks.
If I touch something, I'm telling you, there's gremlins. You talk about Wiccans. I think Wiccans have gotten a hold of my computer.
Exactly.
And
Right when you're talking
cast-
about casting a spell.
Exactly. They knew I was going to be talking about this too. But I find it fascinating that they call it a coven, but when you read some of their little, and again, it's just influential type of literature. They call it a local assembly. Now that's just right out of the Bible. I mean, you know what I mean? Assembly is about one of the more Christian things you can call yourself, is an assembly. I mean, but anyway, I find that to be fascinating. But just don't forget this: people who practice Wiccan often are solo. They're just them, very, very solo. So I think that's an important thing to remember. Covens do meet for ritual and seasonal, whatever you call these things, holidays. And obviously, their big one. What's their big one?
Halloween.
Of course, Halloween. But they don't really call it Halloween. They're worried about those weird worlds like, what do they call that? Vernal equinox, summer solstice, stuff like that. They really do all these kind of, and I think there's 8 of them in their little lore. And I really don't really know all what that is exactly. Now, I think it's one thing, though, to get through your mind here a little bit different. For those of you who know who Marilyn Manson is, we're not talking about Satanism. That is a different thing. Wicca is more or less a nature religion. We're not talking about worshiping Satan in the middle of, some red fiery thing with hoods and junk like that. We're talking about a circle in relationship to, some of the new age things that you might have heard from like Sedona, Arizona, or something like that, where you use crystals. That kind of stuff is more the Wicca thing than this personage of Satan, because they don't worship Satan. And that gets, you want to get a Wicca person really mad? Just talk about Satan. They don't like that even a little bit. I had a girl one time. She tells me, she's right behind me. I'm driving the van, and I say, "Now, sweetheart, I appreciate the Wicca thing, but and she was with some friends going to the beach with us because we do events, as a youth pastor. This is 35 years ago, and she says, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure that when you die, that's all there is, and you become." And I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up. She says, I almost drove the van right into the water. She says, "Yeah, you become one with the universe." Now, this is a 15-year-old girl. I went like this. I went, "You do what? Where did you get that?" And sure enough, it's that stupid Wicca thing. One with the universe. Okay, whatever. Let's see here. Let me talk a little bit about some of the other things. And before I do, are there any questions or comments that you'd like me to touch on before I launch into their other beliefs? If so, speak now.
You talked about seeing the woman with the pentagram.
Yeah.
Isn't that related to Satan, though?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. And, I don't know if you're familiar with syncretism, but syncretism is the practice of taking a little bit of this and a little bit of that and wrapping it in. So my guess is, I'm just making it up because this woman didn't look, though the dog that she had with her looked unhappy, and I was thinking it might have been her husband in a previous life. But, and I'm not making it up. That's what we thought. We thought, didn't we see a husband? We saw 2 people there, and there's a dog. Oh. But anyway, I think some of the Wicca guys will dabble in other stuff, and they'll put things like pentagrams running around. which has not got anything to do with nature. So that's the only reason why I brought it up. Anything else? Okay, well, let's just talk about Mr. Gardner for a second. Now, he's a retired British civil servant. He is born in 1884, so he's an 80-year-old, I think. So he dies in 1964. And most of the time he spent in the British service in Asia, which I thought fascinating because, as you know, Asia has a variety of occultic practices and magical things. And he also read a guide that you can probably still read without feeling too spooky, a guy by the name of Aleister Crowley. He too was in England. You might have heard of him. There was a lot of talk about Aleister Crowley in relationship to the Eagles album, Hotel California, way back when. If you know anything about the song Hotel California, the protagonist in the song asks, if you can leave, and you can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave because the spirit hasn't been here since 1969. Well, the first Church of Satan in San Francisco was founded in 1969. And anyway, the point being is that there was all sorts of interactive things with Aleister Crowley. Now, Crowley is and still is, I think, a Satanist. So I found that very fascinating that Gardner read Crowley, and that's what I mean by syncretism. There's a lot of interaction between Wicca and Satanism, even though they don't really follow any of that stuff. Let's see here, and there in Western lore, there's been all sorts of witchcraft traditions. I mean, you've seen it in your movies, right? You've seen even in Disney. I mean. Snow White and all those things where they're making a cauldron and they're pouring stuff in and they're doing their mantras and stirring it up, and normally it's got the black hat and all that. Wizard of Oz, the wicked witch of the West, does a curse. It's the same kind of thing. Beauty and the Beast, knock on the door, says no, go away, and the witch, puts a spell on the castle, and they all become inanimate objects, even though they aren't. And then, of course, the beast becomes a beast, really his true self, until she meets Belle, of course. In 1951, England repealed their witchcraft laws. There's a great decision. And when they did, this whole thing came out, and Gardner published in 1954, 3 years later, a thing called Witchcraft Today. Now, for those of you who have magazines like, Better Homes and Garden and stuff like that, or Carpenter Today, well, I would give anything to see a first copy of that thing. 1954's Witchcraft Today. You gotta love that. You gotta love it. And he found his very first coven of followers, and they just kind of make it up as they go. So like I said, this is a very new religion. And of course, as you know, in the turbulent 60s, where everybody's rebelling about everything, the late 60s, it crosses the channel and comes over to the United States and catches a foothold with the weirdness of the hippies into all the nature stuff. So you can see where there's ebbs and flows of different thoughts. You know what I mean? And they're coming and going, and they're moving in, and then they move out, and then they create themselves their own niche. So that's very interesting to know. And as you know, the divorce from traditional religion was underway in the late 60s like crazy, and into all sorts of unconventional lifestyles and loving nature, being one with nature, being one with yourself, being one with something, except for being intelligent. And then as a general rule, covens ideally run between 10 and 15 people. It's not like a church where you have 200 or 300. A coven is like small. And they have, I would love to see this, even though I would be scared to do it, but they have initiation rites to get into a coven. I ran into one of those on Whidbey Island one time up at Fort Eby. The guy had the full, he had the silk robe thing with a pole with some sort of dragon's head on it, and he had a hat, and he's like a grand wizard of some sort. And there was two people, and they had these little circle things where all the cannons used to be, and they were doing some sort of weird mantra-ism there. Oh, Northwest is full of that stuff. There's a Wiccan code. It's called the Wiccan Rede, R-E-D-E. R-E-D-E, and in it there's ethical codes. I just find that hilarious. People who come up with ethics, I always ask, based on what? Where can you possibly create a moral unless you use the Bible? It makes no sense. Anyway, sorry. So the Rede states this, and I'll quote it for you so you get it. If it harm none, do what you will. That doesn't sound like much of an ethic to me, but what do I know? If it harm none, do what you will. If that doesn't sound like the late 60s, I don't know what does. Maybe Timothy Leary was dropping some LSD and they came up with the mantra. I don't know. They also celebrate another thing that, again, as you can imagine, nature. What's cyclical in nature? What's one big cyclical thing? Moons. Moons come and go. So they make a big deal about a new moon. A new moon and a full moon. And they really do go after it. And those that are polytheistic will call upon the different gods of each of these inanimate things, very similar to the American Indian, and they share a ritual meal, and there's a whole slew of things in relationship to that. Most controversial to outsiders is that Wiccans call themselves witches, a term which normally Western people think of as Satanist, but it's not. Wiccans deny any connection to devil worship as a general rule. They are much closer to Hindu than they are to any Satan thing. And I would argue, if you really, really wanted to go down that path, Wiccans are closer to the American Indian panentheism than they are anything. By the 1980s, by the way, by the time Mr. Gardner got done and he dies and his followers put these influences out there, something on the order of 50,000 people are Wiccan. Can you imagine? I don't even know what that means. I could go on and on. There's all sorts of different new groups compared to the Gardner people. They do different things. There's a movement which you can look up that is very close to Wicca now. It has split off. It's called the Neo-Pagan. 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 The only difference there is that they worship the goddess all right, but they don't believe that they're witches. And that's called a Neo-Pagan. One of the things that Gardner wrote in one of his books is that the incantation, if you're going to worship the goddess in an incantation in those, whatever you call it, those 8 holidays, they're all supposed to be done without clothes. Now, the Neo-Pagans rejected that, and that's where the robes came in. And that's one reason why a lot of times you'll see these guys in those gray, drab robe things. That's a Neo-Pagan thing. So anyway, the Pagan Foundation, and there is such a thing, an international fellowship of your pagans. And if you want to be a part of that, man, I would, if you did it, I would just enjoy to talk, have a cup of coffee and listen to the stories of what the heck those guys are saying. But they're estimated between 100,000 and 1 million of these neo-pagan guys in this federation. Can you imagine? Oh, okay. Enough of the pagans. I'm done with that. Questions, argument, debate before we go to Jehovah's Witness? What time we got? Yeah, we got time.
One comment, Ed, I think what they call Halloween is Saturnalia.
Is that what it's called?
I think so.
I believe it. There's so many of those things. They bring them in. There was one in my notes here. Started with an S, but it didn't sound like that. Normally, I don't teach anything I can't pronounce. How are you feeling, by the way?
I'm not doing too bad. I'm pretty sore still, but
Yeah.
got real good results from the doctor. Still
Okay.
waiting on the biopsy.
Yeah. For those of you put on your prayer list, Jeff Roberts, he's just fighting some significant health issues. Him and bottom line, he was coming to Israel. Now he's got to back off of that, and we'll have to come another time. Okay. Anything else? Wicca. Okay. JW, Jehovah Witness, been around forever. Let's talk about them. Now, most people don't know this. I guess I should just fill in your blank here first. Let me see if I can find it. A lot of times as Pam and Jim know, I sometimes will just go down a path and I forget even an outline. Who needs an outline? So founder, the main founder is Charles Taze Russell. Charles Taze Russell. Once Mr. Russell was out of the picture, another guy became very, very big. His name was, what was his name? Rutherford. Judge Rutherford. He would be carrying the Jehovah's Witnesses into the 20th century. It began in Pennsylvania. It is now headquarters, as it has been for quite a while, in Brooklyn, New York. At one point in time, Jehovah's Witnesses was the largest, by volume, publisher in the world. They published more documents, pamphlets, flyers, books than anybody else in the entire world. Hard to believe. Writings, the big thing that you can put on here is that the writings, the only thing that's authoritative to them is what they call Watchtower. Watchtower is a publication company, but it's also an entity. So anything that says Watchtower publication, therefore, Watchtower publishes the New World Translation. That is the Jehovah's Witness version. I've got a copy in my office, have had it for a long time. They've cut anything out of there. They've left a couple things on that they should have got rid of, though, for their own benefit. But they've cut a few things out of there, in particular John 1:1, where they took out the indefinite article and put a in there. So Jesus is a God, not, God. Very fascinating stuff. There are other books that are big. There's a magazine they do called Awake, and that's big to them. There's a book called You Can Live. You Can Live Forever in Paradise. That's the title. Because they do a lot of things, ladies and gentlemen, that are end times oriented. They scare people into their little thing, which I'll talk about here in a minute. I could go on. Reasoning from scriptures, that's one of their big ones. I could go on and on about that. God, one person God, called Jehovah, no Trinity. Jesus is the first thing created by Jehovah. That's the way they look at it. The first thing created. And they get it out of Colossians 1:15, which you can look up yourself. 1:15, that Jesus is the firstborn out of all creation. They would say that firstborn meant that Jesus was, in fact, made, not, with the Trinity before the foundation of the earth. Problem of that, of course, is that if you use the word firstborn to mean chronological, you got a problem with Colossians 1:18. Remember I said 1:15 was where the firstborn of all creation is. But 1:18 says that Jesus is the firstborn of the dead. Wait, there are people that, if you're going to use a chronological hermeneutic there, then there are people that were dead and were raised to life before Jesus. So something's wrong. And obviously firstborn, the term in Colossians 1:15 and 1:18 means preeminence. It means he's above everything in creation, and anybody who's dead and comes out, it's Jesus is number one with that. And we find that kind of thought throughout the book of Hebrews, where Jesus is greater than the angels, greater than Moses, greater than Abraham, greater than Melchizedek, blah, 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 blah. So they they camp on that Jesus being created thing quite heavily, which is very fascinating. Now, just so you know, and it's going to get really complicated, because once you get a Jehovah's Witness off their little spiel, their dogma is quite complicated. So Jesus is not God, right? But the question is, who is he? If he's not God, who is Mr. Jesus? Any hazard guesses out there?
How about a good teacher?
A good teacher. Oh, that was rude. That was good. Oh, come on. Think of anybody in the Bible. Any name in the Bible. Pick one that you think might be who Jesus is according to Jehovah's Witnesses.
Adam.
No. That's nice, though. It's a good try.
I'm going to go with Moses.
No. Okay. It's Michael the Archangel. Jesus is Michael the Archangel, believe it or not. And therefore, Jehovah made the universe through Michael the Archangel, who happened to be what you and I call Jesus. That's one reason why he's not God. On earth, he was a man who lived a perfect life, and after dying on a stake, and I say that specifically because they don't believe he died on a cross. They believe they wrote it's a stake. And that's one reason why you won't see any crosses in a Jehovah's Witness garb or building. There are no such things because it's a stake. Now, they're about 700 years wrong. Crucifixion was done on a stake. The Assyrians invented the whole thing back in the 700 BC, and you would put your hands above your head and pinned like this, doubled, and the nail thing would go through there up here. The Romans later on, I don't know if they got this from the Greeks or what, but later on they put the crossbeam out and put the arms out, thinking that it would in fact let them last a little longer, because most people know that people die in crucifixion from not being able to breathe, not anything else. You can't keep yourself up, and the strength wearies. And of course, with a cross, it could take you 3-4 days before you would die, and some people last a long time. And that's one reason why, if you remember right, the Roman centurion comes to Jesus, he's going to break his legs. That was a very common thing, so the guy could die faster. But when he comes there, it's already there, and he just thrusts the the spear in the side to ensure it, and out comes water and blood. Remember that? And of course, the pericardial sac, once pierced, it separates from the heart, and that's even though the Romans didn't know that, but that's the indication of death in the first place. But most of the time, it was from suffocation. You just died. Ew. So on earth, perfect guy, lived a perfect life, blah, 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 but he died on that stake. He is resurrected as a spirit. They do not believe in a physical resurrection of Jesus. And you're probably wondering, where do they get this stuff? I mean, seriously, you read the Bible. How can you even, I can handle all sorts of aberrant, unorthodox stuff, but What make? I mean, he specifically tells Thomas, "Here, touch this and give me the fish that the spirit eat." I mean, how can they? Hello, McFly. Anyway, sorry.
Ed, sorry, I have a question. So do
Sure.
they take these things from the Bible? Like, is that where they're getting these stories from? They're quote the Bible?
Yeah, as they have written it.
Oh, okay. So the rewritten version of it. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, what I just said about the Jesus is one in his resurrection. He specifically shows his hands, to show the whatever you call it, scars, and he specifically eats. What spirit eats physical food? The answer is no one. And he's doing that on purpose because of what? Because you had old doubtful Thomas over there. He's not buying it. If you remember right, Jesus appears without Thomas the first time, remember? And Thomas.
Yeah, I guess so my question then is like with Jehovah's Witness, like they in their minds, they found these stories in the Bible and then rewrote their Bible to look like to read this way.
No, they
does that make sense?
Yeah. No, but okay. It's not quite right. So Charles Taze Russell believed that, just like all these guys do. Remember me? Well, maybe I don't remember who's been with what, but remember Gnosticism? Do you remember that concept? Jehovah's Witnesses are basically Gnostics. So when you look at Colossians and Galatians aiming at Gnosticism, you're basically aiming at modern day Jehovah's Witnesses. What's a Gnostic? Well, Gnostic, again, is knowledge. A Gnostic says, I have special knowledge that no one else has. I have been endowed by the Spirit to fix the church, to fix belief, whatever. You see what I'm saying? So Jehovah's Witnesses are very much that way. And Charles, now remember, these guys came, now again, if we were at church history, we would follow this. Jehovah's Witnesses were a millennialist organization. That means they were aiming at what does the millennium look like at the end of the world? Well, they came out of a group that thought the same thing. They're called Adventists. Jehovah's Witnesses came out of what is called the Adventist Church. And in that, they were founded in 1872 and by this Mr. Russell, and he took the Bible and his lovely little predictions, and with a guy by the name of William Miller, and they created these prophecies because they were into millennialism, like what was going to happen at the end of the day. And these guys were prophets, and ergo prophets. What do we know about prophets? They're supposed to be right. The Bible specifically says if you're wrong as a prophet, you know what you're supposed to do? You stone them. So I don't know about you, but I don't know that I would be prophesying too much out there. If I'm wrong, I'm going to get killed. That's right out of Deuteronomy. And, if you're a false prophet, you're toast. Well, these guys were wrong all the time, constantly. But they believed in that. That's another reason why I'm not a big fan of eschatology, because they're so difficult to understand all the allegory that goes into eschatology, and to be anywhere dogmatic about it is I've got better things to do. Let's just put it that way. Mr. Russell, however, and Mr. Miller did not agree. Ergo, they created this belief system. And they have all these supposed scholars that did all this research on the archaeology and found out that there's a stake, not a cross, with the Romans. Are they out of their minds? They're out of their minds. That's just flat out not true. And they're just trying to add, if you ask me, in my opinion, complete charlatans to the fact that they know something that other people don't. So one of their, so he's resurrected as a spirit. His body is destroyed, so it never comes out of the grave, which of course is belayed several places in the texts. He was not going to come again. He, in fact, returned as a spirit in 1914. There's more. They predicted several different times. I'm trying to think if there's another one around here. Yeah. Well, William Miller, he actually proclaimed it in 1830. He said that Jesus would return in 1843 or 1844. I'm not exactly sure how come he didn't get it exact, but 43, 44, either one would work. And of course, that didn't happen. And when that occurred, then in the 1870s, Charles Taze Russell created himself as the independent Adventist teacher, and he came up with all these special deals, including things like he rejected belief in hell. No such thing. None. Now, that is different than a annihilationist. There are several people who are annihilationists that I respect, including Edwin Fudge and John R.W. Stott. Very sharp dudes, and they believe in annihilationism. That is, that you're in hell for a while, but the body is consumed, and you no longer have conscious understanding of where you are. You're dust. Okay, well, I disagree with that, but at least I get it. These guys said that hell didn't exist at all. They also created, from that concept, a non-Trinitarian view of the whole thing. And they do it by focusing on a word called perosa. Periosa? Well, here, I'll spell it. I've got it around here somewhere. P-A-R-O-U-S-I-A. Now, that's a Greek term. P-A-R-O-U-S-I-A. You can look that up yourself. But what it means is presence. So they believe that God was present, as in around, but not necessarily the Trinitarian thing where you have these personalities in one. They didn't buy that at all. So therefore, Christ would come as an invisible presence in 1844, in 1875, in 1914, in 1974. They have been predicting this forever, and they've not quite got it right. Even though now they say that in 1914, he did come back. Invisible. Even though the Bible clearly says that every knee will bow and every eye will see when he comes, doesn't matter what the Bible says. They said he came back in invisible form and talked to the 144,000 saints that would be in the millennial. And of course, the 144,000 saints got nothing to do with what they're saying. That's another completely different thing in eschatology. They've literally yanked something out. They're uneducated folks that have yanked a number out of the Revelation and put it in their lore. 144,000 are Jewish guys who are protected by God in the tribulation. Hello, McFly. Why would Jesus come back? That makes no sense. To talk to 144,000. Did you know that in Jehovah's Witness, this is under other beliefs, did you know that they only allow communion to be taken by one of the 144,000? Did you know that? So they prepare the stupid communion and they pass it around, and all those 144,000 have already been there. They've already identified who they were. They've all died, and they still pass the stupid communion around. What in the world? Sorry. Okay, forget, moving on. Salvation, very simple. Be baptized as Jehovah's Witness. Acts 2:38, repent and be baptized. Christian Church, Church of Christ, they all think the same thing. Not into Jehovah's Witness, of course, but the point is, it's called, technically, the theological term is called baptismal regeneration. How are you regenerated? Well, you and I would think, oh, baptism of the Spirit. There you go. That's actually biblical. But they think it's baptismal regeneration as in immersion in water. Wrong. That's not it. When Paul says, hey, I'm glad I've not baptized anybody except for Joe and Bill Bob. Remember that when he says that? Well, if baptism was the salvation method, then for crying out loud, he certainly wouldn't be saying that he's glad he didn't baptize anybody. Jeez. But, you know, it all comes down to whether or not you believe the Bible is inerrant and inspired. If you do, then you follow what the Bible says. It's the only rule for life and faith. If you don't, you can make up anything you want. You can be a Gnostic all day long. I get that from all sorts of denominations. They just don't buy the Bible as I do. That's all. Their choice. I'm sure many of them will be in heaven. Can't imagine why, but they will. So you're baptized in Jehovah's Witness, right? Most followers earn everlasting life, because you can lose it in Jehovah's Witness world, by door-to-door work. For those of you who thought that was missionary oriented, it's not. It is made in order to keep their salvation. I heard a guy on Focus on the Family, been a Jehovah's Witness for years. He said he knocked on the doors of 30,000 doors, 30,000. And he said, of those 30,000, two came to the Kingdom Hall, which I believe, because it's not a matter of evangelism. Nobody, door-to-door evangelism hasn't worked for 30 years, but it's to keep themselves anointed, if you will. Death. Well, 144,000 live as spirits in heaven. Those guys, they were faithful Jehovah's Witnesses. The rest of the righteousness, the great crowd, will live on earth. So when that mansion in the sky, that one that's 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles cubed, sorry, you're not going. You're going to be here on earth. And now, I know this is going to sound just crazy, and you're just thinking, where do they get this? But I'm not making this stuff up. They think that you will live on earth, you Christian people, 144,000, the select few, the elect, they're gone. They're in heaven. The rest of us are going to live on earth in a reconstructed hierarchy of God, and we are going to be required to live, now catch this word, perfectly for 1,000 years. If you don't live perfectly, you're annihilated. I just don't know what to tell you there. That's a lot of hope and joy. No wonder they don't celebrate Christmas. Jeez, are you kidding me? Ick. 1,000 years of perfection? I can't get 10 minutes of perfection. I don't care what kind of new body I've got. That's a problem. Okay.
Who decides they lived perfect for 1,000 years? Who makes that call?
Well, I'm assuming God does. I could be wrong. Maybe it's Watchtower. I don't know. But it just, their document specifically says that remember, they're millennialists. Millennialism is perfection. Therefore, even though that's not true either, not biblically anyway, but I mean, I just don't got any words here. I don't know how many doors you're supposed to knock during the millennium. Maybe you don't do, maybe they rest that part of it. Maybe it's all about, I don't know. Well, they can't celebrate anything. They don't believe in national pride. I don't know. I just don't know what's going to be done for 1,000 years. But whatever it is, if you don't get it right, ostensibly you don't make it at all. You're just interesting. Okay, a few other beliefs. Let me get through a couple of these, and then I'll ask for any other questions. I don't know if you knew this or not, but Watchtower actually has a longer term thing. It's called the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Have you ever heard that before?
Nope.
Watchtower Bible and Tract. Tract, Tract. They meet in kingdom halls instead of churches. Once a year, the Lord's evening communion is put out there for the old 144,000. They don't observe holidays or birthdays. That's in their little dogma. They're forbidden to vote, absolutely forbidden to vote. You're not allowed to show any allegiance to any nation. You're not allowed to salute the flag. You're not allowed to work in the military. And you're certainly not allowed, and this is a big one, because of course, in our highly litigious society, for some ungodly reason, that's one thing that I actually agree with them on, is how much everything is so regulated. They don't accept blood transfusions, which can be a major problem with CPS. So if their kids need a blood thing going, they're not allowed to religiously. And there's been lots of court cases over this kind of thing, which is no different than Christian Science, which has done the same kind of thing. Very fascinating. Okay, questions before I talk about a couple more things on them. Trying to watch my time. I'm already behind. Hard to believe. Anything? Going once? Okay.
Ed, have you ever gotten into a good conversation with any Jehovah's Witness, like at your door?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Not only at my door, in my house.
Are they like the Mormons, where they continually come back again and again?
No.
Like
no.
Okay.
No, they Mormons are the same thing. They're both the same in this. Once they identify you as a problem, they mark your address as they're not coming back.
Okay.
They actually have a map system for that. They actually mark your. In fact, in normal towns, and I think Modesto would certainly qualify. They actually mark the curb, so when people go by, they know not this one's. You didn't know that? Yeah. When I was in radio school, I was dating this girl, and she told me she was a Christian. I went, okay, well, I just turned my life over to Christ a couple years ago. Blah 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 blah. And make a long story short, I really thought, hey, this is the girl I'm going to marry. And she says, I'm going back to my original religion, and I'm really, really into it and stuff. And I'd like you to come and meet with some of the people at my church. I said, okay, fine, whatever. I was a youth pastor at the time. So I go there. It's a stinking Kingdom Hall. I go, you're a Jehovah's Witness? She used the same terms as anybody would. Of course, I didn't know anything back then. And so I thought, okay. So anyway, I had their elders, their brothers. I can't remember what they were called. And they sat in my lovely apartment and tried to convince me of a few things. That was my very first foray into going into academic research, because I had to know what the heck I was saying if I was going to talk to these guys. And since I'm not afraid of debate about anything, I wasn't going to back down. Other people, if you really aren't sure of yourself, just don't engage them. I mean, that's avoid every evil, right? That's 1 Thessalonians 5:22. Avoid so you just avoid it. There's no reason to do it unless you feel confident that you can make some sort of difference. That particular girl, by the way, we remained friends throughout the entire time. And when Susan and I were dating, Susan would come up to Portland and she would stay with Greer, the Jehovah's Witness. There's ways to break up. There are ways to break up, my friends. Okay. One thing that you can put in your notes here on other things is a thing called the Millennial Dawn. That's what they called the 1874 reoccurrence of Jesus, which of course wasn't true. But I love that. Millennial, the invisible presence, which I love when you read the stuff in their little lore about the Millennial Dawn, 1874 thing. Christ's invisible presence signaled the end of the current order of society. You gotta be kidding me. Where do they? I should be one of these guys. That's what I should do. I could make up this stuff better than they could. I won't bother you with that stuff. Judge Rutherford, he's the guy that changed the name, by the way, from the Adventists knockoffs to Jehovah's Witnesses. It was 1931 when they did it. And it's mainly to emphasize the members' belief in Jehovah. The next guy, remember, they have presidents. So, you know how you have superintendents, popes, stuff like that? Jehovah's Witnesses have presidents. The next guy after Rutherford, so you had Russell, Rutherford, and then Knorr, Knor. And he decreed that all society books and articles were to be published anonymous. So you have no idea who wrote any of their stuff. Not their Watchtower, not their Awake magazine, not their books, nothing. And he also started, that Knorr guy started a new translation of the Bible because he knew he was in trouble if he kept the old one. Because anybody with any biblical thing could show, as I just did on 5 of their points, how screwy that is. Revelation 7:4 is a big thing to the Jehovah's Witnesses, so you can look that up yourself. Bottom line, the 144,000 human co-rulers of the millennial. Very fascinating stuff. Yeah. They strict separation from the government, real strict. They believe that to pledge the allegiance to the flag is a very, very bad idea when it comes to Christianity. Okay, onward to Mormonism. Let me see if I can find anything on here. I threw away all my notes here. Where'd I give them? Okay, Mormonism. Joseph Smith, you know about that. 1830, he started in New York. Writings, you know, I've already said this in previous episodes of Q3 for sure. The Book of Mormon. Doctrine and Covenants, that's Brigham Young's biggest contribution to the whole thing. Pearl of Great Price, and of course, the Bible. Smith had his own inspired version, which he said you can watch the Bible, but you can only, trust it as far as it's correctly interpreted, which I find to be hilarious. Remember, the Book of Mormon is nothing more than a history book. You should get one. You know, if you've got insomnia, it will solve it instantly. You'll find that Doctrine and Covenants is the one that has all their screwy little rules and stuff. God the Father was once a man, but progressed to godhood. Progressed. Oh, geez. You can look this up if you'd like. It's called process theology. That is, that God is learning his job. There's actually people, non-Mormons, that think that. They try to explain away theodicy from it. Theodicy is the idea that how can God tolerate evil? Or for that matter, did he create it? It's called theodicy. And this whole concept of progress to godhood, it's the point of, well, evil's happening, so God must not quite have his job in order, which philosophically is just asinine. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I don't have any, I would use stronger language on that one. That's outrageous. It is kissing cousin to another one called open theism, where God does not know the reactions and or actions, but reacts himself to all circumstances. If you know anything about a guy by the name of Rob Bell, he's been with Oprah, wrote a book, Love Wins, where there is no hell. He is an open theist, somebody who thinks God is just kind of reacting to things. Don't care about that. In under the God thing, he has a physical body, as does his wife. I don't know if you knew that God was married, but he is. I'd love to sit in the dining room table for that one, for the conversations there. And his wife is called the Heavenly Mother. I don't know if you've ever heard that one before. There's no Trinity, but each one of those, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, are three separate gods. That's called tritheism. Worthy men only, sorry ladies, men only may one day become God themselves. And of course, Jesus is a separate God from the Father. He was created as a spirit child. A spirit child by the Father and Mother in heaven. Now, I don't want to be phantasmic here, but you got to be kidding me. Just think about the logistics of that one. I mean, he's a man, but he's spirit, but he creates a baby. That means she has an ovary in heaven. You got to, I mean, oh my. Okay, let's see here. So Jesus is, quote, the elder brother. That's why they're called elders, by the way, all the time, everywhere. They got those little name tags, elders. The elder brother of all humanity, believe it or not. How about that? Didn't know that I had an elder brother. I'm an only child. How many guys, anybody only child? You guys all have brothers, sisters? Okay, I'm only child. But I guess I'm not. And is the elder brother of all men, and of course the spirit beings. Now, I don't know if I don't know how graphic I need to get here, but you can look this up yourself. Jesus is actually conceived by the physical body of God coming to earth and having sexual intercourse with Mary. I'm sorry, the body was created through that. There's a thing called transducianism that I've always wondered. I'd love to get a Mormon high up guy, ask him, so how does sin get transferred to the human race? And I mean, they obviously believe in the seminal view, because there is a view that says that sin is transferred by the semen of the man. Could be. I mean, that's not unusual thought. Jews certainly thought the man had the evil sin side of it, and the women were more pure in general. But I just don't know. It's weird. So Elohim comes down, and that's what they call him, by the way, Elohim, not Jehovah, which is very fascinating. Elohim, and has sexual union with Mary, and therefore Jesus is produced. Jesus himself was married. According to Mormon lore, he has a wife. His death on the cross has absolutely nothing to do with atonement, but does provide everybody with the opportunity to have resurrection on that very interesting little juxtaposition. I won't mess with the Holy Spirit part, but salvation, you're resurrected by grace, but saved by works. That's Brigham Young's quote. Resurrected by grace, God gives it to you free of charge. But when it comes to keeping your exalted godhood business, that stuff is happening by works. You're saved by going through Mormon baptism, tithing, ordination, marriage, and a slew of secret temple rites, which frankly aren't worth my time. If you want to look that up, you certainly can. But there's no eternal life without Mormon membership. Not eternal. Eventually, everyone goes to, when it comes to death, one of three separate heavenly kingdoms. I've already mentioned this before. Celestial, the earth becomes a celestial sphere, according to Mr. Smith. A sphere. And then the rest of us go to either telestial or terrestrial heavens. They are not the big one, though. uh, so, I just don't even know how to explain it with the time we've got. But if you don't make it to one of the three heavens, it means that you are an apostate. You were going toward the Mormon thing, and then you turned around and said no. Or they say a murderer. That's one of the reasons why you will find Mormons to be extremely pro-life, because they believe that anybody that is an apostate or a murderer, as they think any abortion is, they think that that means you will go, and this is a quote out of Brigham Young, you will go to outer darkness, not hell, this thing called outer darkness. Whatever outer darkness is, I guess it's the worst that you can have. It's bad beyond bad. Okay. Any questions before we go to other beliefs? Because I got to hurry. Going once? Okay. So no alcohol, no tobacco, no coffee, no tea. You can have
And I heard that they just changed the caffeine thing. They can have caffeine now.
I believe it.
Because they
Yeah,
own
They
Pepsi.
just changed it.
Mormon Church owns Pepsi.
Well, the Mormon Church has stock. They used to have stock in Coke, but they have stock in lots of stuff.
So could I share that when I was a child, my one grandmother took me to the Baptist Sunday school and my other grandmother took me to the Mormon church.
Oh,
I have
wow.
no recollection of anything I heard in the Mormon church, but I sure do remember that Baptist Sunday school.
Oh, well, there you go. Must not have been quite so good. They go for a long time. A typical Mormon will go from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. on a Sunday because there's 3 different things they have to go through, including a communion service as well. There's baptism on the behalf of the dead. Now, that's one of the interesting other beliefs. So if you die and you have just been, I don't know, a bad Mormon, I get to go be baptized in your stead. That will get you in some form or fashion in the door, I guess. There's a 2-year missionary commitment encouraged for all people coming out of high school. I tried, I won't tell you the story, but I did go to the Mormon temple in Santa Monica and tried to get in to see the baptism of the dead process. They wouldn't let me in because I guess you got to be a good standing. They call this Mormon in good standing. And just so you know, Mormons didn't like black people at all, African in particular. They thought that if you read the Book of Mormon, you'll see 2 tribes. They believed the Africans were one of them, combined with the American Indian out of Canada. It's a very long story, but black people were not allowed to be in Mormon churches up until 1878, and that had to do with the statehood of Utah, because the government wasn't going to allow it because of polygamy. Polygamy is a much bigger thing than what the Mormon historians want to talk about. But anyway, so Smith, I think you are familiar with Joseph Smith had a brother. Let me see if I can find the original thing here. Okay, well, we'll just take them one at a time. So other things, let me just run through some other thoughts about the Mormon Church, and we'll come back to Smith and his brother. 16 million members. 16 million. The majority of them live in the United States, but the Philippines is the only place in the 90s and early 2000s that was actually growing. The Mormon Church has been shrinking for quite a while, except in the Philippines. Another Mormon denomination, which most people don't know, the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints is the one that you all know in Salt Lake, but there's another one called the Community of Christ. And until 2001, they were called the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints. And they are headquartered in Independence, Missouri, and have about 250,000 people. And if you went to one of their services, you would think that it was an Orthodox church. Do know that Smith believed that he was establishing Zion. He had read it somewhere. He was establishing a new community called Zion, 1,000-year reign of peace, and that he thought that the angel in his little interaction with him had given him the idea to be built somewhere in the Western United States. Very fascinating. Early church members devised all sorts of secular institutions, but they also talked about collective ownership, which ended up being collective tithing. For those of you who don't know, early Mormon folks, they actually shared ownership in everything and took accordingly to fulfill the community's needs, very similar to Acts 4:30. And they also, however, as almost all the leading Mormons did in the church's early years, have polygamy. I don't remember the number of wives, but I think it was 30 something that Joseph Smith had. Brigham Young had 56, etc. So after the church's founding, Smith and a bulk of those people went to a place called Kirtland, Ohio. That's K-I-R-T, Land, Ohio, where a preacher who was of some fame, accepted them. However, obviously Mormon teaching wasn't so hot, and people got really mad, and they drummed them right out of Kirtland. And he went to Nauvoo, Illinois, where he built a town out of scratch. And it became a Mormon center, and all sorts of people came there. It became very successful. Farmers type of thing, agrarian economy, of course. But then they started, now this is a very long story, so I don't want to bother you with it, but the bottom line is all those secret rituals that they do in the temple, most of those came from the Masons. And the Masons have a blood oath. They call it slicing the neck, that if you ever reveal those secret things that go on in Scottish Rite temples, etc., 33rd level, blue Scottish, blah, 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 you can be killed. Well, Mr. Mormon guy decided that he's going to incorporate that. That wasn't very smart of him. And it created a complete riot in Nauvoo, where he was arrested as a result of it, and a lynch mob came and killed him. Killed Joseph Smith in Nauvoo in June 27th, 1844, along with Hiram, his brother. Hiram got him a gun, and they actually shot a couple of the guys that came to get him, but he definitely died. So now the Mormon Church is leaderless, and now the question is, what do you do with it? Well, they had set up this hierarchy. It's called the Council of 12 Apostles. The most senior leader was a guy by the name of Brigham Young, and he took over, and he went west. For 2 years, he went west, and he ended up in Utah. He wanted to call it a state called Deseret. It's now called Deseret Industries, which is basically the goodwill of the Mormon Church. If you've ever seen that, that's what that is. Hundreds of people came, thousands, I think it's 80,000 net total in the 19th century of Mormons came west to Salt Lake, along bringing polygamy left and right. However, Joseph Smith's widow did not want to go down with Brigham Young. She stayed there with her son, Joseph Smith III, and they formulated the reorganized Church of Latter-day Saints that is found in Independence. Mainly because Joseph Smith said that the location of Zion was supposed to be Independence, Missouri. And if you remember Independence is a gateway to the West. You know, they always call St. Louis, but it's really Independence that's the gateway to the West. A lot of smaller groups moved around with that. There's all sorts of Mormon sects that people don't even know. It's hard to know. One of those colonies is found in Short Creek, now called Colorado City, where a polygamist group lives, as well as El Paso, Texas, there's a entire commune of Mormon folks, and then directly north of Lake Michigan in Canada, polygamy everywhere. They believe that, well, I already told you that. Don't need to worry about that. Don't need to worry about that. I already said that. One thing about the who's in charge. So they too have a presidency, but they call it the first presidency. So whoever the first president is, that's called, that first presidency is a group of people of three. One is the church president, and the other is called the two counselors. And those guys, those three people, run the church. Directly below them is called the Council of the 12 Apostles. And directly below those guys is called the Quorum of 70, if you're wondering how that all works. They all manage, along with what is called a presiding bishop, the church's property and welfare programs, which is, there's a ton of it. In fact, that new LDS center they put in Salt Lake for their annual deal seats 22,000 in an amphitheater. Can you imagine that? 22,000. At the local level, Mormon churches are divided into stakes of 4,000 or 5,000 members. They have a stake president, and then they take the stake and they divide it into wards. And each ward has a few hundred members, normally under a bishop. I interviewed a bishop back in 2000 in my office, Bishop Rick, R-I-C. And he told me all sorts of things. I was writing a paper on Mormonism for a college thing. It was really interesting. Okay, any questions about the Mormons before we sign off?
I have a question. Well, there's someone in the chat asking a question too, but
Oh, sorry.
I don't know if you want to get to that first.
What's it say? You talking about Mormons? I can't speak. I literally know nothing about their missionology. All I know is that I know the Philippines are the only place that it actually is growing. The Bishop Rick told me that. That Bishop Rick guy, he said that the Mormon church has just as many problems as all the evangelical churches, as far as like people who are just there because of the community, people who are there because they're nice people. People don't really follow the Mormon dogma. In fact, half of them don't even know what these things are, belief like secret underwear and handshakes and stuff like that. They don't even pay attention to that stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, what is it about Jesus coming to the Americas? Is that Mormonism?
Well, I think what they're yes, but I think what they're talking about is the Lamanite, and there's another group. I can't remember what the name of them are. But the bottom line is the Book of Mormon shows these two tribes, and they fight, and it's a long fight, and there's lots, and they've been there for a long time. Supposedly supposed to happen in Western New York and Eastern Pennsylvania. Fight. One wins. And part of the black race is the part that didn't, and they're tossed out of here. And the white ones stay. Now, this isn't racism in any particular form. It's just the way the guy thought of it in relationship to what the color of who was what in these battles. Well, make a long story short, Western New York and, of course, Eastern Pennsylvania have a lot of people in them. There are no ruins. There are Pueblos, you got ruins everywhere. Incas, ruins everywhere. Aztecs, you can find them all over the place. Lamanites, zero. So the question is, where are they? And the Bishop Rick guy told me that he said that the Mormon scholars say that all of the Book of Mormon happened in Guatemala. And I went, Guatemala?
Sorry.
What are you talking about?
That's funny.
And he said that that all the ruins and stuff are in the jungles of Guatemala. And I said, well, that's convenient. It's the most restricted government in the Western Hemisphere, and nobody can get in there to put a plow to anything to find. No, that's not what it says. So anyway, I thought that was quite annoying. Heck of a nice guy. But you got to be kidding. Guatemala, really? So anyway, there are no proofs of anything that the Book of Mormon happened. It's all fanciful. And you got to realize that was a golden plate, remember? Golden plates, angel Moroni, and the little dice things with the special glasses, look in the bag, to interpret the words, because it was, quote, in hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics? That's not a biblical script. Hieroglyphics is before the stinking Jews with Egypt. Made no sense. Anyway. Other questions, argument, debate, comment?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Sure.
The reason I'm the one that asked the question online. The reason I asked about the Latin American influence, my father-in-law, he's with the Lord now, but when he was a young man, he was evangelized by Mormon missionaries, and my father-in-law is actually Native American from Guatemala, and it's pretty interesting. That's why it was always confusing to me, because of their ethnicity, their views on ethnicity, why they would actually go to a place where they knew that the darker your skin is, you were on the wrong side, like you said earlier. And
I think Efren,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's Latin America's their problem.
Okay.
The doctrine of covenants specifically says African. It's black.
That is interesting.
It's not.
Wow.
It's not Latin, not American Indian, not Filipino.
Right.
It's black.
Cool.
Yeah.
So that one. So they weren't influenced by racism, or it was just a call.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I don't think it's
Understood.
racism in and of itself, because they did.
Right.
They didn't have any interaction with black people.
Understood.
I mean,
okay.
you're talking 1850, Western Utah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Yep. Okay. Anybody else going once? Okay. I will take that as you're good. Now, let me just double check what I'm planning on doing next week, because the week after that, I'm going to do the denomination thing. I believe next week I'm going to do the Unification Church. I think I'm going to do Christian Science, because I think Christian Science is really, really fascinating. Oh my God. Anybody have any background in Christian Science? Oh my, it's so much fun. And I'm going to talk about New Age. That's the three that I think I'm going to try to think if there's anything. Yeah, those three are the big ones that I'm going to touch on. So New Age, Christian Science, and the Unification Church, otherwise known as the Moonies. If you're got any connection to East Asia, you will know what the Moonies are. Very fascinating. The Moonies. Not to be confused with the Goonies. Different. That's a movie.
That's a Korean-based religion, yes?
Oh, yes. Sing Young Moon. Very fascinating.
Wow.
One of the more interesting characters in religious history.
Wow.
Okay, so I'll see you next Sunday, 6:00, and tell your friends that the show is on. The class is on now. Shelter Cove Live. They've got a receptacle for it, so you can catch them up through 1, 2, 3, and then we'll do 4 next week. And then the following week, we will shoot for denominations. Even though denominations. We'll try to get some of the big ones in that you've never heard of. United Church of Christ is one of my favorites. Okay. Peace, love, joy.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.